Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, October 19, 1903, 8 in the morning. The mechanism was on the workbench under the magnifying lens, and the first thing Heinrich Brower noticed was that it had already been taken apart. Not by him, not by anyone he knew. It had been taken apart and not reassembled, and the parts were arranged on the felt pad beside it in an order that was not random. They had been laid out with deliberate intention, in sequence from largest to smallest, the way a watchmaker lays out disassembled components before beginning reconstruction. Someone had opened this thing before him, someone who understood how to disassemble it, and then they had stopped. He was 53 years old, and he had been making and repairing precision mechanisms since the age of 14, when his father had apprenticed him to a master clockmaker in Stuttgart. He had been in Pittsburgh since 1878, working first for a jewelry firm on Liberty Avenue, and then in his own shop on Penn Avenue since 1884. 19 years in his own shop. His clientele included the managers of 3 Carnegie steel operations, 2 judges of the Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas, and the chief engineer of the Pennsylvania Railroad's Pittsburgh Division. These men brought him their most complicated timepieces because Heinrich Brower had a reputation for seeing what other watchmakers missed. He had never seen what was on his workbench. The mechanism had arrived the previous afternoon by private messenger from the estate of a man named Cornelius Duff, a retired superintendent of the Oliver Iron Mining Company, who had died in September at age 77, leaving an estate that his attorney was in the process of cataloging. The attorney, a 45-year-old man named James Rankin, whose firm handled estates for several of Pittsburgh's retired mining executives, had found the mechanism in a locked cabinet in Duff's study, alongside a written note in Duff's hand that read, "From the number 4 drift, Iron County, 1888. Do not try to operate it." The attorney had sent it to Brower because Brower was the most qualified person in Allegheny County to assess a mechanical object of unknown origin and unknown function, and because the note's instruction suggested that someone had already tried to operate it and found the attempt inadvisable. But here is what the Carnegie Institute of Natural History, the Bureau of Mines, and the Oliver Iron Mining Company's successor entities have spent 122 years making sure you never ask about. Allegheny County, in the autumn of 1903, was the industrial center of the American steel economy. The Carnegie steel operations that dominated the county's manufacturing landscape drew their raw material from iron mines across the Great Lakes region, and the Oliver Iron Mining Company, the Carnegie subsidiary that controlled iron extraction from the Lake Superior iron ranges, had been operating in Iron County, Michigan since the mid-1880s. The number 4 drift that Cornelius Duff's note referenced was an operational level of the Duff mine, named for the superintendent himself, which had been one of Oliver Iron Mining's most productive operations in the period 1886 through 1892. The mine had closed in 1893, 9 months ahead of a scheduled expansion, in a closure decision that the Oliver Iron Mining Company attributed at the time to a shift in ore grade projections. The ore grade projections for the Duff mine, as filed with the Michigan Bureau of Mines in 1892, had shown a projected 18 additional years of viable extraction at the current working depth. Cornelius Duff had retired from Oliver Iron Mining in 1895, 2 years after the mine that bore his name closed. He had taken nothing publicly and said nothing publicly about the closure. He had kept the mechanism in a locked cabinet for 15 years and written a note that told whoever found it not to try to operate it. Heinrich Brower spent the first hour of October 19th examining the mechanism without touching it. This was standard practice. Before any disassembly, a competent watchmaker examines the visible surface of the object for evidence of what it contains. What the visible surface told him was this: the object was approximately 9 inches long, 4 inches wide at its widest point, and 2 inches deep at its thickest section. The casing, the outer shell, was made of a material he could not immediately identify, dark, close to black, with a surface texture finer than any metal polish he had achieved in 39 years of watchmaking, and with a specific gravity when he lifted it that was higher than steel and higher than lead. He set it on his precision scale. 14.5 ounces for an object of those dimensions in any material he knew was impossible. Iron of those dimensions would weigh approximately 7 ounces. Lead would weigh approximately 16, but lead did not have that surface finish. The material was denser than iron and lighter than lead and smoother than anything he had polished. The casing had been opened along a seam he could see running the full perimeter of the object at its midpoint. The kind of seam a watch case has, the line where the front and back halves of the case separate. The seam had been opened, and the interior components he could see through the gap, because the person who had opened it previously had not fully reseated the case, were not what he expected. He expected gears. He expected the train of wheels and escapement that constituted the working heart of any precision timepiece. What he could see through the gap was a series of thin, laminar elements stacked parallel to each other, separated by hairline gaps, in a configuration he had no category for. He opened the case. The components inside occupied most of his morning. He removed them one at a time, the way he removed the components of any movement he was servicing, and laid each one on the felt pad in sequence. There were 31 individual elements. Some of them he could name by function analogy, 3 pieces that resembled, in their geometry, the mainspring and arbor assembly of a standard lever escapement, though made from the same unidentifiable material as the casing, and with dimensional tolerances tighter than anything he had produced in his shop. Most of them he could not name at all. Several of the laminar elements he had seen through the case gap were, when extracted, single components whose geometry he could describe, but whose function he could not assign. Flat, precisely shaped, with a pattern of raised features on one face that bore no resemblance to any gear tooth profile or cam geometry he knew. By noon, he had all 31 components on the felt pad, laid out in the sequence in which he had removed them. He had his notes. He had his measurements. He had measured each component with his finest calipers to a precision of 1/4 millimeter. He had a complete record of the disassembly. Then he tried to put it back together. He worked for the rest of October 19th. He worked through October 20th. He came in on the Sunday and worked until midnight. He brought in his journeyman assistant, a 24-year-old man named Otto Fair, who had been with him for 3 years, and who was the second most capable person in the shop. Fair examined the components and the notes and the measurements, and could not improve on Brower's reconstruction attempts. The components fit together in ways that Brower could identify. He could see, mechanically, that certain elements engaged with certain others, but when he assembled them in the sequence dictated by their geometry, the assembly would not complete. Not because a component was missing. Not because a component was damaged. Because the final stage of assembly required a configuration that the geometry of the components suggested was possible, but that his hands could not achieve. The tolerances were too tight. The final engagement required a precision of placement that exceeded what human hands, working with the finest instruments available to a Pittsburgh watchmaker in 1903, could produce. Someone had built this. It had been built by someone whose hands, or whose tools, could work to tolerances finer than anything Heinrich Brower possessed. The disassembly was his. The reassembly was not. He wrote to Cornelius Duff's attorney on October 22nd. He described what he had found, what he had attempted, and what had defeated him. He said the object was of unknown material, unknown manufacture, and unknown function, and that it could not be reassembled by any method available to him. He said the object should be examined by someone with access to analytical instruments beyond those of a working watchmaker, a materials laboratory, a university department of mechanical engineering, or an institutional specialist in pre-industrial mechanism. He returned the object in its case, with all 31 components in the sequence he had removed them, along with his notes and measurements. James Rankin received the object and the letter. He replied briefly. He thanked Brower for his examination and said the estate had received notice from a representative of the Carnegie Institute of Natural History that the object might be of institutional interest, and that he was proceeding accordingly. He said nothing further about what proceeding accordingly meant. The Carnegie Institute of Natural History had been founded in Pittsburgh in 1896 by Andrew Carnegie, with a mandate to collect and study natural history specimens and objects of historical and scientific significance from the American industrial region. In 1903, its collections included mineralogical specimens from the Lake Superior iron ranges and archaeological material from the mound sites of western Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio. Its director, a 61-year-old naturalist named William Holland, was in direct communication with the Bureau of American Ethnology in Washington on matters relating to pre-contact archaeological material from the Ohio Valley region. A letter from Holland to the Bureau's director, dated November 4, 1903, is in the Carnegie Institute's Administrative Archive at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. The letter refers to a mechanical artifact of uncertain origin received from the Duff estate and notes that it has been forwarded to Washington per the Bureau's standard protocol for anomalous material of potential pre-contact provenance. The Bureau of American Ethnology's incoming material log for November 1903 shows a 3-entry gap in the sequential catalog series covering the first 2 weeks of that month. The gap is not annotated. Cornelius Duff's note, "From the number 4 drift, Iron County, 1888, do not try to operate it," raises a question that no institutional record addresses directly. The number 4 drift of the Duff mine reached its operational depth in early 1888. The mine closed in 1893. In the 5 years between the note's date and the mine's closure, Duff had the mechanism in his possession and had apparently tried to operate it. The note's instruction not to do so was written in the past tense of caution, the kind of sentence a man writes after an experiment whose result he does not want repeated. What happened when he tried to operate it is not recorded. The mine's closure records, filed with the Michigan Bureau of Mines in 1893, cite changed ore grade projections. The ore grade projections filed the year before cited 18 additional years of viable extraction. The closure records offer no geological data explaining the change. They offer only the administrative decision. The Iron County mine closure of 1893 was not isolated. The Oliver Iron Mining Company closed 3 additional shaft operations in the Lake Superior Iron Range between 1891 and 1897, each within 18 months of a reported incident in the mine's operational log that was subsequently redacted from the log before its submission to the Michigan Bureau of Mines. The redactions are visible in the Bureau's archive copies. The pages show evidence of physical removal followed by renumbering of the page sequence. The pages that were removed from 3 separate operational logs across 3 separate mines in a 3-year period have never been located. The Michigan Bureau of Mines was notified of the redactions in a formal inquiry filed by a state legislative committee in 1899. The Bureau's response cited the mine operator's right to protect proprietary operational data. The committee accepted the response. The pages have been gone for 126 years. The Tartarian framework places the object from the number 4 drift not as an anomaly in the Iron County geological record, but as evidence of a manufacturing tradition predating any industrial civilization the official timeline places in the Lake Superior region. The Lake Superior copper mines of Isle Royale, where 300,000 tons of copper were extracted from sealed geological strata before any European contact, by a population the official record does not name, operated in the same geological corridor as the Iron County iron mines. The Lake Superior Basin produced, in the pre-contact period, evidence of a metallurgical operation whose scale and precision exceeded any known Native American technology. The mechanism from the number 4 drift was found in iron-bearing geological strata at a depth and in a geological context, placing it outside any date range the official industrial history of Iron County assigns to human activity. Tartaria names the civilization that made it. The Oliver Iron Mining Company named nothing. It closed the mine and redacted the logs and sent the mechanism to Pittsburgh and then to Washington and then to a catalog that shows only a gap where the entry should be. The Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh holds William Holland's administrative correspondence from the period 1896 through 1915 in its archive collection. Holland's November 1903 letter to the Bureau is in that collection. The collection is accessible to researchers by appointment at the museum's library. Heinrich Brower's measurement notes from his October 1903 examination, the specific dimensions of all 31 components, written in his precise hand with his precise calipers, passed to his son Frederick after Heinrich's death in 1921, and from Frederick to a granddaughter, Elsa Brower Hoffman, of Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, who donated the Brower professional papers to the Western Pennsylvania Historical Society in 1968. The measurement notes are in the Western Pennsylvania Historical Society's collection, in the folder of Brower professional correspondence from the period 1900 through 1910. Heinrich Brower never explained to anyone why he could not complete the reassembly. He wrote the letter to Rankin. He described the impossibility in professional terms. He did not speculate in writing about what the impossibility meant. He was a man who had built a career on the principle that a mechanism was explicable if you had the right instruments and the right training, and the number 4 drift object had told him, in 3 days of work, that his instruments and his training were insufficient. He put the components in the sequence he had removed them and sent them back and wrote a letter that said he did not know what the object was. He was a watchmaker. He had been telling people for 39 years what things were made of and how they worked. He knew when he could not tell them. Heinrich Brower, 53 years old. October 19th, 1903. The mechanism was under his magnifying lens in the 8 o'clock light from the Penn Avenue window, the light he had worked by for 19 years, and the components were already laid out on the felt pad by someone else's hands, in sequence from largest to smallest, waiting for hands that could put them back. He looked at them for the first hour without touching them. Then he picked up the casing and put it on his scale and read the number and wrote it in his notes. 14.5 ounces. In material denser than iron and lighter than lead, smoother than anything he had polished in 39 years. The notes are in the Western Pennsylvania Historical Society. The object is in a catalog in Washington that does not list it. The number 4 drift has been sealed since 1893. What Cornelius Duff tried to do with the mechanism in the 5 years between finding it and writing the note, the attempt whose result he did not want repeated, is in no document that any institution will produce. The priest in Carroll County, Maryland, who translated the stone and burned the translation before Sunday, had a different kind of professional knowledge and the same professional silence. He burned his record. Brower kept his. The mechanism is gone from both of their stories. What remains is the measurement, and the measurement is the evidence, and the evidence is in the archive, and the archive is open on weekdays.